Hello everyone. Today we gather here to talk about the subjectivity of Kurdish women and their potentials of agency. First, I will be talking about the limitations of a nomadic understanding of subjectivity in the case of economically and politically marginalized groups. Then, my white, Turkish, middle class and male friends will be talking about the potentials of agency for Kurdish women. Finally, our beloved and authentically Kurdish friends will provide a more situated knowledge to improve our understanding of the Kurdish context. I shall start first. The first time I read Braidotti, I was completely enchanted by her theory of subjectivity. The way she opens up a space in which subjectivity becomes fluid, collective, and interpersonal, blurring the boundaries of the self and the so-called others, and focusing on the desire for life and joy seemed quite emancipatory and important for me. However, then I realized that nomadic subjectivity could be hard to maintain or even to mention in most of the cases for several reasons. And today we will focus on the Kurdish independence movement and the role of the woman within that. First, Braidotti always indicates that her theory is highly shaped by her own personal life and she is aware of the privileged position she occupies. However, in her theorization of nomadic subjectivity, she does not explain how the woman who is not European, white, or economically advantaged can become a nomadic subject, or better said, can afford to become one. She says that only joyful affirmation had the power to generate qualitative shifts in the process of becoming. One wonders what are those qualitative shifts. And she says creativity and imagination are inseparable elements of this process. This creativity point is also emphasized a lot of time by Anzaldúa in her conversation about mestiza consciousness. However, my question here is that how come an economically, politically, and racially marginalized group of women can rely on ethics of joyful affirmation? After all, Braidotti does not explain what are the ways in which one can transform the negative into positive or destructive emotions to affirmative emotions and making possibilities of it. As Spivak says, Western authors most of the time seem that they recognize their position, but in reality, they actually almost forget about their privileged positions and the social and economic conditions that might blind them to the existing reality. Secondly, this might sound a little bit controversial, but I want to question the necessity of such an affirmative transformation. Why is the only potentiality for change and improvement seem possible through joy and positivity, but not through rage, grief, or even in some cases through revenge? I do not want to victimize anybody here or indicate Kurdish women as merely oppressed, as Mohanty also warns us about not to do so. However, I do want to raise questions about the position from which theory of nomadic subjectivity is produced and whether it reaches its goals to theorize female subjectivity outside of the European context. Finally, my last concern is about the potentials of collective politics. How is it possible to make politics in a collective way if the subjects cannot even unite around their strategical sameness? The positivity of difference indicated by Braidotti, that is, considering the difference in positive terms, is something I actually value. However, it seems that nomadic subjectivity provides no grant to unite around political goals. I have the fear that nomadic subjects will get lost in their horizon, or equally the fear that their roads will never come across with other nomads, and this will obturate the potentials of collective politics. I guess now I can leave the word to my dear colleague.
Thank you, Tankut, for giving me the chance to speak about agency of Kurdish women. I would like to first frame discussion with Nanette Funk's distinction between proactive and reactive agencies. Then I will problematize this distinction and claim that agency should not be subjected to degrees and should be analyzed within the specific and historical structures and limitations that women face. Following this line of thought, Kurdish women's identity and their agency should be found in the places where they manage to bargain with the patriarchy and open up spaces of their own. As Tankut hinted in the first part of his presentation, sometimes agency is presented as something that is affordable by a group of people in a very specific setting. For example, in Braidotti's formulation of nomadic subjects, agency of the subjects is preconditioned on her ability to afford being a nomad in a European context. Nomadic subject is at leisure to experience and experiment with her shifting subjectivity and her in-betweenness. If women become a nomadic subject by virtue of process of becoming, what do we say about those who cannot experience that process? Can we say that those who are not able to afford to be nomadic have agency? In other words, can we say that those who cannot do politics of joyful affirmation exercise their agency? Does agency require active involvement with a political project that aims to actualize a feminist agenda? Do we say women have agency only when they are actively working for a feminist cause? And as a more general question, do we only see agency as a will to make positive changes? Funk's distinction between proactive and reactive agency seems to support the idea that women exercise their agency by their active involvement with a feminist political agenda. Funk defines proactive agency as acting because of your own will, policies, commitments, or initiatives, and reactive agency as acting because of the will of the other. She values proactive agency because the agent can make a meaningful contribution to the feminist cause only through this kind of agency we are talking about. However, there are problems with this kind of dichotomy because I believe that it is constructed around Western tradition of seeing individual as rational, reasonable being, having the capacity of deciding and acting for herself. By saying that actions of any other agent, which is not related to the Western tradition and which is not proactive, cannot be counted towards the cause of feminism, Funk frames feminist agenda and agency in a hierarchical manner, devaluing other forms of asserting agency. As her example of women of Soviet Russia, Funk disregards the ways in which women of official women's organization navigate with the state power and negotiate with the state power and navigate through the limitations put by the state nationalism. Instead of limiting agency to active involvement with a feminist political agenda that is characterized as beneficial for the rights of women, we should focus on women's capacity to live their lives with their will, within the limits of their own particularities. As an example, if women in these organizations are able to gain some financial security for themselves, this should be seen as a form of agency, and this way of performing agency should not be subjected to degrees and values. In the case of Kurdish women, we should not argue that only those women who actively participate in the politics making in the Turkish assembly or in their active involvement with the armed conflict against Turkish state have the kind of valuable agency that Funk was talking about. Instead, we should look at the women's daily lives and see how they are managing to both identify themselves as Kurds and identify themselves as women, and how they bargain with the patriarch in this process. Oh yeah.
I think she's asking a good question. So the Kurdish identity should...
Yeah, you're right. I mean, he's right, I guess, right?
Because he's a Kurdish man.
And of course, I mean, we should consider his class position as well.
Yes, but...
Yeah, you're a heterosexual man too. Can he talk about women?
Okay, but I need to interrupt you guys here, because you are silencing me right now. And also we, as three men, are silencing women, Kurdish women that we are talking about. And we are talking about their subjectivities and agencies without them being here present, right? And that's a very problematic way of framing it. Besides, you are treating her as only a Kurdish being, right? We do not see beyond what is the Kurdish identity, and that's not the case, and it shouldn't be the case. So a person is never like Andrea Petto's cow. it doesn't consist of a single identity that could be grasped, right? A person is the configuration of multiple identities which are manifested in different times, in different ways, and depending on the context, it could be manifested differently as well. So when we're talking about Kurdish women, like Rizman did, we have to ask the other question about the gender, about ethnicity, religion, class, education, and so on, right? So unlike Peto's cup, a subject is never a single unitary identity. Now, in order to understand it, we have to look at the intersectionality. And there are two things that I would like to remind you guys about intersectionality so that our discussions could be more sophisticated. The first is the manifestation of configuration of these identities might differ based on the context, time, individual preference, or structural or institutional availabilities or pressures. For example, Paula's friend in Poland could not reveal their homosexual identities, but when they moved to England, they did that. So we see that the context actually matters. Another important aspect is that you discussed Kurdish women only through oppression, but that's not the case. The intersectionality of identities, in some cases, in some times, might actually empower people. For example, my claim to be a feminist person oppressed me in my village because that identity challenged the patriarchy of certain groups of people. However, the same identity actually empowers me in Central European University gender studies. Now, these labels that you put on me as the heterosexual, man, Kurdish, etc., does not reveal how intersectionality actually works. And it is very problematic that it doesn't. So, I know it is difficult when I'm talking about intersectionality, so I actually want to show you how intersectionality works. And this is only through eggs, right? Treat eggs as one of these categories that we discussed, be that gender, ethnicity, race, or class, or whichever one that you want to talk about, right? See, in this process, we see that the egg whites, which are intersecting and intermingling all the times, thereby enabling the individuals to be consisting of different identities, but these identities are interacting, intersecting, and informing one another. However, at the same time, we see the egg yellows, or egg yolks, giving the possibility to manifest the identities in different times and in different frameworks. Now, this is the way that we should be talking about Kurdish women as well, right? We are all in a process of becoming, and this becoming is not always manifested in the same time or in the same way.
No, I didn't see that coming.
Yeah, I mean,
Right.
now go turn it off.
Yok derken bir şeyleşmesi, Britishleşmesi yok. Yok.
Ya,
Ben güldüm.